Education Society, along with myself and two others, Jeanette and Kim, will be presenting Domain 8 today, Programs, Products, and Services. I want to thank Mary for coordinating all this, not only this week, but obviously everything she's done to get the group up and running. So as we dive into Domain 8, we're going to be talking about the development of programs, products, and services, fundraising, sponsorships, and development programs, meetings and events, the certification, accreditation, and licensure topics, professional development programs, and affinity programs. Let's see here. Okay, so specific to the programs, products, and services, what we'll be talking about are member services and some non-dues revenue streams. Through the programs, identifying things like education and credentialing, products like meetings and trade shows, and services, affinity programs, and endorsements. Jump too far ahead there. Much like the other modules, there are some similarities, and we always go back to our strategic thinking, our judgment-based decision-making, and our relationship building here. Thanks. Also, when it comes to developing programs, products, and services, and we're going to go by PPS here because, you know, what is an association thing without a new acronym? They're how the organization actualizes their core competencies. Members are the need of the focus, and much like everything else, we're going to implement the SPI aspect: scan, plan, implement, and evaluate. So when it comes to the member needs, first off, identifying, is it in alignment with the mission and the organization's strategic plan? How can we meet the needs of the members and pay for them? Obviously, the budget coming into place there. Considering any legal issues, which again is a common theme throughout the CAE testing modules. Fulfill and deliver the need, and also evaluate them at the end. So when we're considering developing a non-dues revenue program, again, we go back to that mission alignment, mutual benefits. You also need to take into account staff time and protecting the brand for the organization. Okay, so here from the programs, products, and services, the CSE role. This was in the reading, and I thought it was very helpful. It talks about diversity, and our roles as leaders is to ensure that the association and all its services demonstrate sensitivity to not only race and ethnicity and those types of things, but also to geographic location and professional level. Then we have our two sources again, the mission and the members' documented needs, is where the products and services should actually boil up from. We need to be firm on our mission, but flexible about our products and services. And when we're adding some new products and services, there may be some that no longer serve the need. However, there are some programs that they termed them the sacred cow in the last training because of the member focus of the programs. They might not have the financial benefit that some new programs do, but they offer huge value to the membership. So even though they're not necessarily money makers, they may have a different kind of value to the organization and obviously to the membership. So in conjunction with the programs, products, and services, there's a relationship to the components. That being that the components do provide a network for the parent organization for continuing education, as well as increasing the awareness of the programs and services that are being offered, and also a marketing channel for those. One of the things that came about is obviously this will vary from affiliation. In the affiliation agreements, things should be spelled out, but it will obviously vary greatly depending on the different organization and the different programs and services, so it's really going to be customizable. But the key fact from the reading here was that the relationship with the components is essential. Trust there is a big part of that, and also communication. It needs to be continual, effective, and sensitive, kind of hearing what they have to say, as well as sharing the information with them. Oftentimes, to expand the scope and activities of the organization, there's a need to development subsidiaries. So with that, it will allow the association to engage in activities that it might not be permitted to by its purpose, charter, or bylaws. It's going to enable the organization to offer services that are more niche, as well as provide those additional revenue sources. And again, coming back into play, not only the financial risks involved, but also the tax liabilities that we've heard so much about before. And when you're thinking about taking programs and products and services global, again, we go back to kind of our scan, plan, implement, and evaluate. So we need to see what opportunities are there for the organization. And at the same time, another element comes into place that many of you have probably heard of, the SWOT. Take a look at what the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats would be in deciding to go into that global marketplace. Whenever you're doing this and gearing towards a new audience, so this could be global, or even when it comes to some of the components and such, it's some of the suggested ways to kind of engage that audience is just to start to incorporate their needs into some of your existing products and programs and services. So maybe a column in your magazine, taking some of your events and meetings international, appointing some editorial advisors from around the world, including speakers from outside the U.S. to present. So just sort of ways to start that process and see. It's also another way to test the waters, if you will. Okay, so now we got into the Association Law Handbook chapters that were relevant to the topic, and obviously the legal issues that pertain there too. One of the biggest areas here is the publications and copyright law. So that comes into place with where the creator obviously holds the copyright and the work for hire element, where as an employee, essentially the organization would then have the copyright for any works created as an employee. So that's something that is good to have, and if it's not written somewhere, then it's an assumption. However, when it comes to volunteers, it's actually the flip side of the coin, where the organization does not have any rights or copyrights to the information that they provide unless they specifically get that in writing. Also, when it comes to the publications, considering defamation and the liabilities there, invasion of privacy, tax status when it comes to the advertising income, and even just subject matter in publications that's not relative to the status purpose can bring about concerns there. The endorsements, you can't use photos or names to promote products or services without written consent. Actually, mailing lists can also come into play here, and copyright considerations have to be reviewed. And so many of the programs can't be exclusive like many of the other things, and there's the availabilities to the non-members, and of course those can be at a greater price point, but at the same time it still has to be reasonable. And now, since the addition of the publication, there is the role that the internet plays there. So publications before seemed to have a smaller scope, their print edition. Now with the internet, there's obviously the opportunity to put things online, databases and things of such. So what you need to do is ensure that anytime you're getting a copyright, that you try to get a bundled copyright agreement so that you have access to use that information in a variety of sources, because if it's not explicitly saying that, then you will be limited to what you can use it for. Okay, then we get into the risk retention groups, and that was something actually kind of new. I hadn't experienced in association management from my perspective, and those allow for participants to purchase insurance at favorable rates, or for the organizations to offer self-insurance to the group, and they're competitively buying and supporting services from the insurers. So some legal aspects there. The collective bargaining programs. These are actually in decline, but still remain relevant for many business associations. So obviously the associations there are serving as a multi-employer bargaining group, and the antitrust laws are a big consideration there. And while the litigation that has kind of come through the courts hasn't necessarily been directed at the associations themselves, it's more to the other parties involved, it is definitely something to kind of touch on there. Then we get into credit reporting. That's where the associations are compiling and distributing reports of customers who are past due on accounts, and the overall goal there is to notify the members or participants of potential poor credit risks. So there, the basic concerns go back to the antitrust violations, boycottings, and fixed credit terms. There's possible liable in publishing those lists, and tax status becomes a player if it's a significant portion of the association's activities. Keep going through here. Now we get into marketing of our programs, products, and services. Association marketing is the responsibility of everyone within the organization, but at the same time the CSE has to assume the responsibility for for the marketing of the association. And unlike businesses where there's clear products and services, sometimes in associations it's a little bit unclear. There's definite products and services, but also some of those kind of fundraiser type events and functions of an organization that don't have direct monetary value there. Information about your audience is obviously key. Trial and error marketing isn't the way to go. Really, for marketing plans need to be based on, can't be based on past information, groundless assumptions, and high subjectivity. So each department is probably off doing marketing on its own, but it's strengthened whenever there's an overall centralized plan that an organization can refer to, and it helps multiply the effects of all those programs. When you think about the services and programs that were mentioned before, conferences, expositions, publications, and research services actually account for at least a third or more of an association's income. That was from the professional practice reading, so I thought that was kind of a highlight there. And it's also important to keep in mind that marketing for associations, it's not just to the membership, but it's also products available to non-members as well. When it comes to the 4 Ps of market-driven products, programs, and service offerings, we're looking at the product and examining what those offerings are, the price, how it's the relative value one is willing to pay for it, the place or distribution, which is the method that we're going to reach those customers, and the promotion, the plan and the best way to make that product known. Market-driven associations, it actually encompasses all of the association's operations. It includes branding, which is building that emotional tie between our customers and our members, and these products and services we're offering. The environment, again, scanning the environment for changes that are going to impact those members is a first step. And oftentimes out of the organization's strategic plan comes the marketing plan. The budget is also involved in the fact that oftentimes with the PPSs, there's definitely a financial element there as well, and what the revenue potential can be for those services. Okay, so when we get into the marketing plan, there are some key components listed here, and again, bit more detailed in the reading. The introduction is your overall marketing goals and the ties to the mission or the strategic plan. Just something that I found interesting in the reading is to oftentimes include a statement of confidentiality or non-disclosure whenever this is being circulated, just because of some of the information that it may contain for the organization. Then we look at our business summary and the overall marketing environment of the organization, the general business climate, and what the association's offering, and understanding where the organization fits in that market. The research, which is critical for a solid marketing plan, is going to delineate the characteristics of the overall marketing segments and how the association competes there. Surveying members to rate their products and services will help gauge the needs compared to those of others, and kind of putting it in that context where not only are you asking how do you as a member feel about our publication, but what other publications are you reading, so you can understand that as well. And you know, the research to kind of keep it ongoing to ensure to ensure you're tracking those changes and seeing what's happening there. Then we get into the marketing strategies and projections, and again, that's kind of getting back to those 4 Ps and their relationship to the marketing budget, listing the programs, products, and services with their strengths and weaknesses, and outlining objectives for those. You know, where are the funds being spent, what's the expected income, you know, and taking information from previous results and basing the plans on those can be helpful and effective. And then finally, we go back to our evaluation monitoring techniques. Obviously, progress reports, it's good for an organization to report back to the board on those monthly or quarterly, and always giving a chance for those evaluations to adjust how the marketing plan may go, because if something's not working, you can retool and kind of make those changes there. You don't want to be stagnant just because that's the way it was written. You want to evolve. So now we're going to get into the second point of the coverage I was doing, and that's the fundraising, scholarships, and development programs. Funding for the associations is primarily from the leaders, the members, the companies, and everybody that's directly linked to them. And with that, there's often opportunities to generate additional income from those groups that are familiar with the organization. Fundraising programs do require the support of the board, and they're always helpful to implement a strategic fundraising plan there. Associations don't normally fundraise because they are actually serving their members, where the nonprofits are actually advancing a cause. They don't have the membership dues. That's where they come in and rely on donor support. So in the book, and also for the conversation today, fundraising is defined as a short-term income generator, and development is a strategic relationship building tool. But we're going to use those 2 terms interchangeably, fundraising and development, and it's all about motivation. Obviously, the process of contributing does involve an exchange. Not only is the organization getting something, but the person is as well. And when it comes to a fundraising or development plan, it's a big opportunity for a significant revenue stream that an organization can utilize. As mentioned, we need to incorporate a strategic plan when it comes to fundraising. Those need to have a clear purpose and a sense of where the program will go, be responsive to the need, communicate what makes the organization unique or the cause unique, and why those dollars should be allocated for that. And it also needs a workable plan to follow those principles we discussed earlier. So here, the fundraising plan kind of outline goals. They should be modest at first and don't necessarily need to have a number assigned to them, but just what you want to accomplish through that campaign. The case statement. Why is the organization worthy of support? There's some common language that should be identified in that case statement. An agreement on the goals. These excerpts can be used for all the materials, and that could really be the basis for the program. So obviously then infrastructure and the staff roles and the internal support need to be considered, communications and an implementation, and then our operation plan. One of the terms that came out of the course is the LAI, so the linkage, the ability, and the interest, which are helpful in identifying these donor prospects, you know, to have that contact, that bridge, that access through a peer, you know, and can the donor actually make a gift or has the opportunity to, and then interest, cause, and the mission there. So now we look at the fundraising and scholarship development, just some things that I found in the reading. There's little need to sell. Donors want to fund the future. There is an emotional tie, but they're looking for that in response. They're looking for rational reasons to respond to those emotions, and pretty obvious, they give to groups that reflect their values and desires. So whenever you're thinking about your case for fundraising, it should demonstrate the problem or address the issue that is important to that donor. And they, as a donor, they do consider it a not a handout. but an investment. So here we have our 7 donor types, which are detailed, and I'll go through them pretty quickly here. The communitarian, that's mostly a business or business people committed to the community and feel that they need to give back. Devout is God's will for people to help others, and there's a moral obligation there. The investor is maximizing their support by giving wisely. The socialite, that comes into play when things like special events where there's creative ways to give, and they're drawn to the organization because of others involved there. Then we're going to go with, it gives, the altruist gives growth spiritually, evaluates the organization and who's running it, and they do want recognition. The repayer is somebody who has received benefit in the past, and they want to give back to the organization. And then the last group there believes philanthropy is everybody's responsibility, and they want to build a strong relationship there. So then we get into the reasons people give. Again, goes back to the mission and their attachment there and making a difference. The connection between the people, where there's the volunteer and staff leadership, respect for the organization. The fiscal responsibility of the organization is also a big factor there. Sometimes they want to be more involved and play a role as a volunteer. They're interested in a project, or they're persuaded by the person making the ask. So there's a variety of fundraising methods here. The direct mail corporation special events, the one highlight, the major gifts, because that has your highest return on investment. And there's this 80-20 rule that has come across in some of the reading, where you spend 80% of effort on 20% of donors who in turn support the organization 80%. And then the checkoff on dues notices is the least costly way to fundraise. There's a chart on page 197 of professional practices that goes into a bit more detail about those. Let's see. There are different ways to support organizations and different campaigns, if you will, that organizations use to raise funds. An annual fund is raising money for the ongoing support of current programs through unrestricted gifts, and that's trying to get new donors, taking your existing donors and trying to get them to give more. Capital campaigns are normally a certain amount of time, and gifts are encouraged to be multiple year pledges. They're often aimed at bigger projects like constructing and renovating or purchasing big equipment. So then we have our planned giving, which goes into solicitation of gifts from a person's estate or an organization, and then you'll eventually see that later down the road. Special events, and that group we had just talked about, the socialites, that's obviously connecting the donor to the institution, and you have that fun social element. And grant writing, which is the application obviously to other foundations, government agencies, or others, and just persuading them through a process to provide your organization with funding. When it comes to fundraising, oftentimes there's the consideration of developing a subsidiary, and there are some benefits to having that 501c3 status, and that's something that when the CSE test is given, obviously there's the focus on C6, but also there's the association with the C3 that needs to be considered as well. So here you're going to consider the advantages, that being you have the tax ability to make the contributions tax deductible to the organization, or I'm sorry, to the donors. The grants, you can then have kind of open up the doors to receive from private grant making foundations, and there's also tax and postal rate benefits for the organization as well. Some of the considerations to look at are how would that separate entity be comprised, how would the board be selected, how would staff divvy their time, would it have its own staff, and how it would actually complement the existing organization. When it comes to fundraising, there are obviously some challenges to consider as well, and those are listed here. So now to get into the questions. Here's one, so I just put it up there if everybody wants to take a moment and read through it, kind of think of their answer, and then we could review the answers. Does anybody have any thoughts of what they think is the right answer?
So maybe D?
Okay, any certain reason why you chose that one?
Well, definitely not C. Cases and I like D, but I feel like that's too specific. I just like D the best. Those are my reasons. They're not good.
Yeah, and C is, you know, some contributors give, and they don't really have, they have an emotional feeling of giving back to the organization. They may not know exactly how their funding is making an impact, so I don't think it's definitely not C either.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go here now. And B is correct, so.
Yay.
Very good, very good. Okay, so we have one more question with regards to this section, and it is one of the situation-based, so I'll give you all a few minutes to take a look at that. Anyone have any thoughts on the correct answer here?
Okay.
I would say it's the last one. D.
I was thinking, you're saying D?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like D, but I'm also looking at C because in my mind, D seems kind of one-directional, whereas C gets them involved from the beginning and sort of, you know,
Yeah.
I don't know. I like both,
Yeah.
though.
Yeah, the D in reading the last part of the sentence to ensure message delivery, that's not, yeah, and now that I read it back through, I think you're right.
Okay, well, we'll take a look here. And it is C. And I just want to point out again, I think this is where kind of some of the confusion can occur. Again, it takes reading the question and even kind of stepping out of the box, because in reading the chapter on the components, they talked about making sure you phone, email, and things like that, and it's just a matter of kind of thinking on that higher level, and it's like, well, of course, you could communicate, you know, by phone, email, but what are you communicating? And I think that's kind of where you need to kind of step back from the question and, you know, kind of put on that CSE lens, and that way the answer becomes more clear.
Yeah, I think another good thought about this one, too, is that conference calls and frequent email conversations and phone email conferences and field visits. So like B is kind of encompassed in A, but A is encompassed in C. So it's kind of like the details of the greater picture. And that's one of the test-taking tips that they kept talking about in the kickoff course, is that, you know, if you have a question, or a response that is more detailed, look and see if there's another one that sort of encompasses that one, in which case it would not be the more detailed one.
I think that's a great point. Terrific.
And then also in that last sentence, I found the keywords for building trust to be key. It's not really what avenue or like what media. It's, you know, like phone, email, it doesn't necessarily say that we're going to build trust that way, but sharing and seeking and brainstorming together builds the trust.
Terrific. now I'll pass it along.
Okay, I think it's my turn. My name is Kim Goff. I am the Education and Committee Manager for Agentis Management. We're an AMC, and we have mostly healthcare and scientific associations that we manage, so we do a lot of professional development and meeting activities. If you're not extremely familiar with Chapter 32, with meetings, I would recommend you read Chapter 32. It's very, in professional practices, it's very detailed, goes into specific things that you need to consider in meeting planning, but just as a little reminder, when you take the exam, have that baseball manager mentality, make sure you don't get into the weeds. You do need to understand what all the components of a meeting are, but you know, they're not going to ask you, don't think, to evaluate a BEO. So as I was going through this, I realized that just an essential part of meetings and events and professional development is the SPI, to keep SPI in mind in any question that it's asking you. You want to start with scanning. Make sure that you have you know, your purpose is the most important thing to develop. It's the first thing you should do anytime you're planning a meeting. And again, your purpose should also align with your mission, just like your all of your events or products should align with the mission and align with your strategic plan. You want to plan your content, and you want to make sure that you know your audience. One thing professional practices did mention I thought was interesting is that the meetings industry is a $122 billion industry, and associations make up 98% of that. You also want to be aware that some bylaws actually require an annual business meeting and elections. So that is going to be something that you need to keep in mind that you're looking at your meetings, is that it may actually be noted in your bylaws. As far as planning, you do need to know some logistics and operations, and I'll go into a little bit more into budgets and contracts in just a minute. Again, you'll have implementation, and then again, when you're evaluating at your meetings, you need to make sure that you have objectives and goals that can be measured. So first and foremost, as I mentioned, you want to make sure that you define the purpose of your meeting. It's going to determine your content, and it's going to determine all the other aspects of the meeting or event. As far as your budget goes, I'm not going to go deep into that, but you need to make sure that you do have a budget for your event, and that you include things such as your contract with your hotel, the cost of your speakers, any outside vendors you need to contract with, any sponsorships and income that you may be able to draw in, and be aware of UBIT if any of that income from your meetings and events is going to be taxable. Again, with the marketing and what marketing is going to cost, and then again liability insurance, which I'll talk a little bit more about when I talk about the legal aspects of meetings. As far as site selection goes, you probably want to be familiar with the term RFP. It's a request for proposal. It didn't go into great detail about all the aspects of the RFP, but maybe just be aware that you can get help with your CVB for those types of things, and also knowing your audience when you're doing your site selection. What are their needs? What are their budgets? Are they going to want to go to a resort location? Do you need to keep in mind that you need to have an airport close, because if it's a national meeting, you're going to have to fly people in, and all of those logistical things about space when you're considering your site selection. It did also talk in the text about developing a rotating schedule for national groups, just to make sure that you're moving your meeting around so that you can meet the needs of all of your members. And then again, the SPI, you're keeping that in mind, that you want to scan, plan, implement, and evaluate. Some of the legal considerations, there are several legal chapters in the law book that if you're not familiar with these, you may want to read through. I'm just going to basically touch on them. As far as music licensing, you could be subject to some copyright laws. If you are playing it at a public gathering. So it may be necessary if you're using any music at your events as part of your theme or part of your event that you obtain permission to use that, and that's in Chapter 32 of the law book. Liability insurance, it talks about a whole slew of things that you're liable for as far as events go: bodily injury, product liability, property loss, theft. You might need cancellation insurance. You could be opening yourself up to liability if you're serving liquor. And you should also collect policies from any of your third-party vendors. So if you have a decorator, if you charter a bus, if you have a caterer, you should make sure that your association is covered by knowing that they are also covered, and you should obtain a copy of their policy to protect yourself. Again, here's antitrust comes in at your meetings when you have all of your members together. That opens you up to the possibility of discussions happening that you don't want to happen, so just monitoring those and having the proper procedures, noting it, if you know that it's happening, advising them against it, get it on record that you told them to ignore the conversation and that you advised against it. And then also you want to make sure that you open your meetings and events to non-members, because you don't want anyone to claim that it's an unfair advantage to your members and that you excluded them and gave yourself a step up in the market. For the deductibility of business expenses, those are tax laws as far as what your attendees can claim as far as a percentage of meals. If it's a luxury, you're not expressly responsible for that, but it's just something to be aware of. They may ask for a detailed breakout of their registration if your registration includes meals, but I've never experienced that in multiple years of being an event planner, but you just need to be aware of it. And then we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is mostly about access. Remember, if it has to be a recognized disability by the American Disabilities Act. So a food allergy is not a recognized disability, and yes, most event planners are going to try to accommodate that. Asthma is not a recognized disability, but if they do have a recognized disability and they make requests for accommodations, you are obligated to provide that to them, and you are not allowed to charge them for those accommodations. So that's also important to know. As far as contracts go, force majeure is a common term that may come up, and that is just natural disaster. Inclement weather, such as snow, is not usually included. Hurricanes usually are included. And as far as your contracts that you want to look at when you're contracting, remember, a contract has to benefit both parties, has to be agreed by both parties. It can't be one-sided. You should make sure that you have a cancellation clause in all of your contracts. Be aware when you're contracting with hotels about room attrition and any food and beverage minimums that you have. And another terminology that may come up as far as contracts is apparent authority, especially if you have a meetings manager or event manager that's signing contracts for the association, that if they have apparent authority, if your president goes out and signs a contract and the hotel believed that they had apparent authority, the association still is liable for those. So I would recommend you kind of check out some more of those chapters from the law handbook. As far as professional development goes, again, back to the SPI again, you want to make sure you're following all of those important steps as you're developing professional development. The focus on professional development is relevance. Is it relevant to your members? You want to do a needs assessment, which is the scan, to make sure that you are meeting their needs, that you know what education they need, and that they have the skills that they need to go out and make your industry look good. Market research, you want to look into different delivery methods, especially professional development with all of the technology there is. it's not just all about the lecture anymore. You have multiple ways that you can offer professional development to your members. Utilizing adult learning principles and practices. Again, remember, it's not all about lecture. Most groups are moving away from the old, attend the annual meeting and get your lecture, and that's the only place that you have professional development. You need to make sure you're offering a good variety of avenues for your members and different methods for them to learn. Balancing wants and needs. What your members want in education may not be what they need. There's laws a lot of times that specify what they are required to have, especially if they're licensed. So you'll want to make sure you're scanning to understand all of that. And then again, evaluate, evaluate, evaluate. You want to make sure that you're constantly getting feedback from your members, from your attendees, to make sure that your professional development program is delivering what it's promising. Standard setting and standard setting actually I think is discussed also in another module, but it is about best practice and setting best practices for your industry. It is also opens you up to another antitrust issue, so it's important that you give notice and opportunity for everyone in the industry, and make sure that it does not restrict or boycott any competitors, or again, you're going to open yourself up for liability. Back to the slide, when you're doing your standard setting, do your market research. Make sure you issue a business plan. You want to also set up governance. It's important that your governing body be separate from the governing body of your association. It is actually a recommended practice, and it's also a recommended practice on your governing body for your standard setting to have a member of the public on your board as well. And again, you want to evaluate. They did report on standard setting that it is a very time-consuming process, so you don't want to rush through it to get it done. It can take up to 2 years. So you want to make sure that it's successful from the get-go, and really make sure you're scanning and planning well before you implement any standards to make sure you understand what that impact is going to be, and open your association up to liability. Also, credentialing was covered in this group, and credentialing often gets a little confusing for some people because of some of the terminology. So you do have accreditation, which is basically standard setting for organizations. Certification is standard setting for individuals. You have licensure, which is usually administered by a government, which is granted most of the time to individuals. And then you have a certificate program, which just demonstrates completion of a course. Personally, I can say we have a certificate program, and people often confuse it for a certification program. So we have to explain here regularly that we're not measuring competency, we're only saying that you completed the course. So you want to make sure you understand especially that difference between certification and certificate. Certificate just says you've completed it. A certification means they've measured actual competency and skills. And again, accreditation is organizations, certification is individuals. As far as credentialing legal concerns, there's antitrust once again. You want to make sure that your credentialing is open to everyone in the industry, and if you do have a set of standards that you've developed for people that can get credentialed or organizations that can get accredited, that you have set up a appeals process. You have to offer due process. So your denial should be in writing, and they should be able to appeal to a separate body from the one that made the decision, and give them an opportunity to try to get that credentialing. Otherwise, you open yourself up for antitrust liability. Credentialing can also lead to negligence if the public believes that that the person you credentialed should have a certain skill set and you say they do, and then something happens. So you need to consult an attorney about negligence. You also need to be aware of defamation. If when you're going through the process of applications for people that want to be credentialed, and someone makes a statement, oh, we shouldn't approve this person to get credentials because they're a loon, or make some kind derogatory statement about an individual, you could open yourself up to defamation claims. And then again, the ADA also applies for credentialing. If it is a recognized disability, you do have to provide accommodations for them, and you may not require them to pay for it. You are responsible for providing that accommodation to them. Okay, so let's go through a couple of questions that we've put together for these 3 sections. Which of the following factors is most important in developing product standards program?
This is Tammy. I would say maybe B, using members to develop the standards, since the question is about most important in developing product standards.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, I'm wondering, I kind of like C and D in that the improper process for complaints and appeals, I know that was something that was very specifically mentioned, and the communications plan to inform the industry was also mentioned. I really like impartial, though. That word is pretty, that's a good word.
Well, I was kind of at the same as you, but between C and D, because A, you don't want to, your standards aren't about selling your products. Standards are about best practices. So you can rule A out. B, you can rule B out because you don't want to open yourself up to antitrust by just using members. You want to make sure you open that up, to anyone in the industry. So I used LURP to kind of decide between those 2. So the answer is C, because you want to consider first, is it legal, ethical?
Legal, okay.
The R is escaping me. What is the R in LURP? P is practical.
Reasonable.
Reasonable. Okay, so legal, ethical, reasonable, and practical. So this legal issue, you want to make sure that it is, that you have a process for appeals. Okay, the main goal of association education. This one actually stumped me the first time too. That's why I included it. So can anybody tell me what they know it isn't?
What is the main goal of association education? Provide knowledge of skills specific to the industry, impart information to the learner, maintain best practices within.
Well, I would say that D's definitely out.
Okay.
And most likely C's definitely out as well. But I was leaning towards between A and B, and I kind of thought B would be the answer, but I don't know.
I'm leaning toward B because I think it's more a more expansive answer, and many times association education is not specific to the industry itself. There are overarching items or courses that are not just specific to the industry but are still relevant.
Yeah, I go
I
C.
initially, this was another one that I had also gotten wrong, and I had chosen B, but the answer is, oh, wait a minute. Okay, the answer is actually A. And after I got to looking at it, you know, it is, again, back to the concept that it has to be tied to your mission. So you're not just giving them information. It should be information that promotes your mission. So A is a little more specific to your industry, which is probably going to help you pursue your mission. So I am, Jeanette, were you able to join us?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
Okay, so I am going to give the keyboard over to you. So you should now be able to take control.
Yep. Perfect. Oops, I skipped a whole bunch. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeanette Brown. I'm Director of Market Development at the Society for Vascular Ultrasound. Bear with me, I just got out of the dentist a little while ago, so I'm a little bit numb, but we should be able to get through this pretty quick. I have a small section out of this presentation. It's on affinity programs. So here's just the definition of what an affinity program is. It's basically us as an association providing intellectual property to a vendor in the form of our logo, our mailing list, and in return, we get something back, usually royalties from the sales. All right. Oops. Okay. So these are the two goals that were listed in the outline, so I wanted to make sure that they were in the slides as well. And the second goal is basically SPY. They say develop. It's really scan, implement, scan, plan, implement, and evaluate. And so those are really key things when looking at the contract. So some things to think about when deciding if the affinity program is beneficial. For the association, as I listed here, it's great for non-dues revenue. It's great for getting some resources from members that we can't do ourselves. And of course, the bond between you and the member. And the affinity partner, of course, it just gets their name out there. That's pretty clear. And of course, the member, if you're doing an affinity program such as a credit card or maybe bulk discounts on a product or a program, by partnering with someone, you can provide your members with that better deal. So all in all, it tends to be a win-win if these things are looked at. And so when looking at the contract, it's not wise to just sign up on a contract with a group because you've heard it from one or two members. It really is figuring out, within your mission and what the members have asked for, maybe in surveys. A big thing with affinity programs is UBIT. I know UBIT's been put out there in different domains, and we'll touch a little bit on UBIT as well here. The key thing with the contract is using words like royalties and licensing agreement, that no one's an actual agent. And then of course, during the process of the contract, you always want to evaluate how it's going. And a key thing to always include in a contract with an affinity program is a termination clause. You always want to have the ability to get out of it, make it very clear on both sides when the end of it is, and if it does roll into maybe the following year. And one thing I read is that no matter what you do, you always consult with your legal counsel prior to signing any agreement. So UBIT concern seems to be really the most what I read about affinity programs. And so the reason why the contract should state that you're receiving royalties is that underneath an IRS code, they have a special exemption from being charged that tax from UBIT. And of course, I forgot the term they use, but whenever you have dividends or interest, it's the same thing as royalties in the sense that that's kind of passive interest or passive income. So always make sure that your contract states that you're receiving a royalty and not like a 50% share of the sales of a product. That way, you'd be exempt from paying any possible tax on it. Again, it seems like anything that deals with a contract or financial, you're always supposed to consult with your advisors. And this is the end. So this is our last question. So I'll give everyone a chance to read it. All right, does anyone want to chime in kind of what they chose and why, or why you didn't choose a different answer? I see we have a few C's in the chat window. All right, so it looks like a few people have been saying that they, so which of the following would likely be free of UBIT liability? They wouldn't choose A because it said commissions instead of royalties, which is correct, and then B because it says actively markets, and that's definitely a sign that you might get charged UBIT when you actually take part in it, as opposed to being a passive individual. Any other, want to chime in over the phone? Okay, so the right answer is C. If I can get the slide to change. There we go. And so that kind of wraps us up. I don't think there's another slide after this. There we go.